Tidbits last year, and they'll usually take place on the first Tuesday of each month at 11:30 for 30 minutes. So please keep an eye on our website and our socials to keep up to date on all future events. These sessions are designed to educate on areas that you want to know more about, encourage you to innovate with your newfound knowledge, and potentially to collaborate with the speakers and hosts. I'd ask please that any questions that you have we place in the chat box. And also that please, as we will be recording this presentation today, please, if you could put your cameras and your microphones off at the moment, and as I say, if all questions could come via the chat box. So today I'm delighted to be joined by our first tech tidbit of the year by Gareth Edwards. Gareth is the Chief Client Officer of GoCodeGreen. GoCodeGreen is the leading digital carbon sustainability measurement and consulting business based in Edinburgh. And today, Gareth is going to talk to us about what you can do as an individual and as an organisation to mitigate the impact of emissions created by digital technology. So on that note, I'd like to hand across to you, please, Gareth. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Thanks very much. I'll just qualify David's location based. We're based everywhere. We are based in the world. We are a virtual business, but I am sat in sunny Edinburgh. So thanks very much for having us today. And I'll probably just expand a little bit on what we'll talk about before we get into talk about some things you can do, but I also want to talk about why we need to do some of this stuff. So we'll set some context first. Really quickly, just on me, just a little bit of background. I spent 25 plus years designing, delivering digital products and services, both as a client and as a consultant. For those of you Edinburgh based, you'll recognise the traditional financial services journey. I've worked for them all, but I moved into consulting just under 10 years ago. I was asked to found the Deloitte Digital practice here in Scotland, and since working there, I've now stepped into the big bad world of startups with GoCodeGreen, decarbonising digital products. So why decarbonise software? Michael O'Leary, Brian here, the surprising face of sustainability. Technology now accounts for 3 times the emissions of aviation, and it's interesting to get into the comparison between the two and why that's the case, when aviation was always seen as the kind of bad boy of emissions. We're all encouraged not to fly. We're not encouraged not to spend time on TikTok because of our emissions, but the two do equate. Aviation has been maintained its percentage of emissions pretty much since the 80s, 90s. And that's because they like money, probably a bit more than we do. And we've all experienced it, whether it's, we take less luggage, the seats are thinner, the planes are more aerodynamic, and the fuel is better. And all that efficiency driving, very much profit focused, has led to their emissions staying the same, even though we all fly a bit more. So that approach is something we probably need to consider in the technology space. What are some of these techniques we can apply in the world that we operate in, which would maintain or constrain the emissions that come from technology? There's growing awareness about technology's impact on the planet. When you have people like Rolling Stone writing articles about the impact of streaming, starts to kind of capture your attention. So this was from last year: protect the planet, stop streaming songs. Go read it if you get a chance. But some of these streaming platforms have enormous impact in terms of emissions. Some far more than you might imagine. So for those Taylor Swift fans online, she was very much in the doghouse for her private jet emissions in 2023, 2024. Our Spotify streaming emissions were 1,000% more than our private jet emissions. She's a very popular artist. But we need to understand how some of these tools are being used and how behaviourally as individuals we might need to adapt. And we've been very much conditioned to stream, when actually probably we all have 500 to 600 songs we all actually regularly listen to. Just download them. Data centers account for 3% of the world's electric bill. And more than 2% of the world's emissions. This shouldn't be a surprise to technology audience. Emissions from data centers are growing, and it's not just from the old bad guys of the Bitcoin miners. We all store far more data than we probably need. We all are very heavily reliant on the cloud, and it's not as green as we might hope it to be. So really considering our use of data centers and how much data we're storing is going to be an important thing as we look forward to some of the things that's going to expand the impact of technology, namely AI and Gen AI. If we're in a room, an auditorium somewhere, I'd probably dramatically pour half a litre of water into a bucket below me to demonstrate the impact of one conversation with ChatGPT or DeepSeek for those who've been playing with the Chinese authorities recently. Hugely impactful from a water perspective. My GoCodeGreen now started using water impact alongside electricity impact and the impact in terms of carbon to demonstrate how impactful this stuff can be. And Gen AI, this is now nearly a year-old statistic, already accounts for 1% of the world's electricity supply. And as you might imagine, with some of the developments, this is going to get a bit worse. Mark Zuckerberg said, I think in December, that he predicted, or Meta was predicting, that by 2040 we'd need 8 times more electricity than we currently produce today. Not 80% more, 800% more, 8 times more electricity we currently produce. We've already seen nuclear reactors being unmothballed to power data centers for AI. We've seen, grid demand peak around data centers as the grid has creaked under this new demand as everyone's starting to use it. And this entire, impact is seen us already accelerating rapidly towards 20% of total electricity production in just sort of 4 or 5 short years. The huge impact that technology is now having on the planet. We think thinking sustainably in digital technology is an opportunity and not a threat. But there's some things that we need to do first before we can start to leverage that opportunity. Whenever you're working on new projects, new features, new digital technologies, or new implementations in your organizations, adding sustainability as a lens in all product development. So for those of you who are in the kind of tech product space, probably used to talking about desirability, feasibility, and viability. Adding sustainability as an additional tension, an additional lens on that product development, and maintaining an ownership of that lens throughout. This isn't about being 100% only sustainable. It's not in the same way. It was never about being just entirely desirable, but creating that additional tension in the product design process to ensure that what you deliver is going to be delivered at the right level of impact. Really considering your supply chain. As with all stats, they're out of date before you even put them on a slide. The slide's a little bit out of date now, but it hasn't changed that much. Cloud hosting is not as green as I say it is, because it's reliant on us delivering green optimized for cloud applications. But equally, so few of the hosting providers globally are actually certified green. It's a very complex space, as with the most emerging spaces. The definition of a green service isn't yet completely clear and completely defined, but we can still do much more. And I think the some of the alternative ways of doing green hosting in here. So if any of you have come across people like Deep Green Energy, who are made their names by heating local swimming pools with the waste energy from their data centers, all kinds of different ways of being greener around your web hosting. But that's just one part of your digital supply chain. Most of you suspect will be using some SaaS services, some CRMs, online services. I'd ask you to go and ask difficult questions of your digital providers. Ask them for their impact on your Scope 3 emissions, for example. Poke under the hood and see what answers you get back. Not only because you should know, because it's going to be not too long before you're asked to report it. yourself data ready. I'm having the readiness to talk about measurement in a second, but being ready to measure and to be able to reduce your impact is really important. And there's emissions in software, there's emissions in your desktop estate, your cloud data services, both hardware and the telecom and network services. And understanding at the very base level what you need to have in terms of data to be able to measure these appropriately is really important. And in this ecosystem, it's not just the technology, it's the people who support this technology as well. So where your people are based, the grid intensity in those locations is useful information to know in terms of how you might plan and organize your workforce. People and their skills have an impact on the software that you deliver. Measure impact. Can't measure it, can't change it. Fundamental bedrock of what we do as an organization is the measurement piece. We do actions, we'll talk about that later. But for us, in every other area of sustainability, it always starts with measurement. Not gut instinct or that probably sounds like the right thing to do, but by measuring your impact today, giving yourself a baseline and giving yourself understanding what the next best action to take to reduce impact. So everything that we do comes back to how you might measure and how you might therefore reduce your impact. You'd be really surprised at the size of the ICT impact on your operational emissions. And it totally, we've seen the Gartner stat that started my presentation today, which they believe that 30% on average is the level of emissions from IT across a service-based organisation. And it totally with conversations with some of the tier 1 banks here in the UK, they believe their emissions from IT could be up to 50%. So huge part of their operational emissions come from IT or ICT software, and therefore a huge opportunity to reduce their emissions in that space. And possibly, depending on how you approach that, far easier to do that than in some other areas of your journey to net zero. As individuals, we can all make a difference to our own impact on the planet, but also our organisation's impact on the planet. When we talk about our engineering colleagues or software engineers, through measurement and action, you can give somebody ownership of a carbon reduction plan or an application. They can make a difference through engineering choices all the way through to the end. But beyond the engineers in your organisation, everyone can make a difference. Considering your communication channel choices. In most organisations I've been part of, significant large enterprise, we were overwhelmed with the number of choices we had, whether it was Slack, email, Teams, WhatsApp. Do we need all of them? It would be the first question I would ask you to consider. And are we using them as well as we could do? I was at a meeting earlier this morning. We talked about how long we've had access to collaboration platforms and better ways to share files and folders. And I would argue that even today, 15 years, at least 10 years of them being available in mass use, we still don't use collaboration platforms in the way that we should. Your organisation might be an exception, but in our experience, most are still sending big files through email and not really considering the impact of that when they've got other choices. Taking regular breaks from social media as individuals for your mental health, but also it can have an impact. I'm sure some of you are making the commute to London and back or to other parts of the UK or even abroad. One domestic flight can be offset with just 8 to 10 average days without social media use, whether that be Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, or whatever your channel of choice is. It's a really surprising amount of emissions comes from using some of these social tools. Again, digital emissions are invisible. To try and make them real. Creating windows of time to clean your digital footprint. We worked with a team in the NHS here in Scotland, a team of 25 to 30 people from memory, and in just a week they deleted 1.5 million emails. A huge amount. An email has a small impact, somewhere between 0.5 of a gram and 2 to 3 grams, depending on how how those emails are formatted, and at the highest end, 20 grams of large attachments. But a huge amount of difference can be made, and we've become complacent, I would argue, in terms of managing our mailbox. I'll hold my hand up and say I remember the time when I had I think a 5 meg or 10 meg email box, and was constantly pruning the emails that sat within my inbox to make sure I could receive that next email. And it's the same with our phones. We've probably all got tens of thousands of pictures on our phones. A lot of those will be receipts. A lot of those will be things you don't need to keep after a certain period of time. So do give yourself the opportunity to do that. It does make a difference. And on the streaming thing, download your favorite music. Don't have to stream it. Training. On the left is a chart which shows the aggregated scores from the software engineering assessments that we do with clients. I can't remember the total number from top, but it's much more than 3,000 anyway. But thousands of software engineers across our client base have completed this, and we still get an average score of somewhere between poor and fair, the highest score on that chart being poor. This isn't to say these 3,000 plus engineers are bad engineers. They've not been given the sustainability training that we might expect now to deliver more efficient software. And it's not been a constraint they've been given when delivering new products, in the same way our designers have not been given that constraint. So really understand the people's impact on your product, but also understand the engineering choices, and that will shape that. There are some programming languages that are much more impactful in terms of carbon than others. And over the course of time, really understanding how you can make better engineering choices. And a lot of it comes down to hygiene. Some of the organizations we work for, very positive DevOps agile mentality, engineers spinning up 8, 10, 12 test servers and leaving them on because they can, and with no understanding of consequences, they just sit there churning energy. This is for us the kind of components of success, what allows you to make a difference, what allows you to reduce your impact, raising awareness. So go share some of the stuff I've talked about today, and it's really important that people understand that tech emissions are not only a significant part of your overall operational emissions as an organization, but a growing source of emissions in your organization. Go find the data you need to measure. Talk to your cloud providers, use some of their dashboards. Azure has a particularly good set of dashboards. Go and challenge them. Go and understand your impact if you're using cloud, and understand your usage if you're on-prem. Start to understand how you might measure and make a difference. Can't change it if you can't measure it. And understand how are my people contributing to this journey in tech. And all those things combined should give you the ability to take some action and reduce your overall impact. Why would we go about doing it? All of that, it's not just to save the planet. If you're truly sustainable, your products go faster. Statistics are really, really clear. There's examples of 2 identical products launched in the App Store, and one was described as certified green, one was not. The one that was certified green had 5 times more download than the one that did not. Identical applications. The consumers given choice will always choose green, particularly if price is not a constraint. So there's a reason to go on this journey, which is beyond the planetary impact one, which is it can improve your business. It can make a difference. Our data backs up what Gartner shows. 29% of energy and emissions in tech and mature businesses come from ICT. That's an opportunity to save cost. Cost emissions equals kilowatt hours equals electricity equals pounds out the door, or compute costs with your cloud provider. So really understanding, can I make my services more efficient? Can I use my CSP better? Can make a difference to your bottom line. And in a kind of order of magnitude, in the public sector, this is potentially billions saved. In the private sector and in individual financial service organizations, this is hundreds of millions potentially to be saved. Huge opportunity to save against the technology estates that some of these organizations are running globally, because they are being run not as efficiently as they could be. I'm probably finished for this point. David and I talked about the other week, should Scotland be the home for green tech and green hosting? We have all the component parts. Jokingly, it's wet enough, it's certainly windy enough, and it's certainly cold enough. And we're already in a position where we are producing more sustainable energy and at the lowest grid intensity of the whole of the UK, more than we need. So as an opportunity, I'd like to kind of leave with that thought before we kind of go into Q&A. What's the opportunity here in Scotland? We've got certainly the talent, we've got the weather and the sustainable energy to be a centre for green hosting. So what's stopping? That's me.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gareth. That was really informative. Some really shocking statistics in there. It's really made me aware of perhaps how little I look at what it is that I do and the impact that it has. So I'm sure, yes, it's going to raise even more questions in my mind about how we look at moving forward. But on the topic of questions, we have a couple of questions that have come into the chat, and perhaps if I could just put those to you. So George asks, what do you think the future of supply chain reporting looks like when it comes to tech sustainability? How long before data centres are having to prioritise sustainability in order to win public sector contracts, for example?
So based on my experience of recent UK public sector engagements now, would be the answer to the second part of that question. Nearly every tech bid that would, and public sector is making up an increasingly large part of our work at the moment. It's currently being positioned as social value. For those who understand the public sector process, there is a social value component to UK public sector work. And nearly every question for tech delivery starts with, how will this project reduce our emissions? So if there's a hosting component to that, I firmly believe that is now. And I believe that should position Scotland very well, frankly, as a potential host for some of these particular areas. In the supply chain thing, it's very much a mixed bag. I think I've complained a little bit to some of our clients for not asking us difficult enough questions in terms of proving our own sustainability. Obviously, we're a B Corp, and we've got very clear tracking of our impact, and we make zero impact to our clients. But increasingly, the questions will be asked because there's, whether you're looking at the European influence, Brexit regardless, European organisations through things like CSRD are having to put increasing focus on all other measurement into Scope 3. And if you're a SaaS provider facing into one of those markets, for example, it will not be long before you're being asked to report your Scope 3 emissions in order for that organisation to do their CSRD reporting correctly. I'm not the expert on the technicality of the reporting side, but that legislation, as we all probably recognise, that legislation and regulation change is the biggest driver for change. And there is, I think, 2,500 bits of sustainability legislation worldwide, and an increasing emphasis on reporting accurately. And it's whether it's your through your CSP, or you're a user of a SaaS tools like HubSpot or Salesforce, they're all now putting their focus on how they're going to measure and how they're going to report those emissions to their clients. Hopefully that answered the question.
Good, thank you. So Fiona also asks, are there any promising breakthroughs in green computing or energy efficient AI that could help mitigate the emissions?
I think it's really, I had this conversation earlier on today. We as humans, we're a bit magpie. We jump at the the next shiny thing, and we've all jumped on board the Gen AI thing really, really quickly without really necessarily understanding its impact and what the alternatives are. And I think that large language models and the way that those are trained has a huge impact. And it's really hard to ignore that. But large language models aren't always the answer. There are small language models which are much more easy to contain and use much less computing power and are much more specific to the problems you might be trying to solve. So better triage, if you like, what's the right approach when it comes to using the models is the starting point. I think David, I've mentioned this to you. Increasingly, we are seeing the people moving back to on-prem. And it was a big source of conversation out in Barcelona at the Gartner conference, was that people feel out of control with cloud spend, and the additional layer of AI spend, again, unknown amount, is giving them increasing concern. There's lots of talk about large enterprise doing what they call microgridding, where effectively they build their own power source. So you might expect to see people looking at the way they generate and use electricity being different as their way of dealing with the increased demand for electricity. So you talk about the Zuckerberg stat of 8 times more electricity. That's going to come from somewhere. And if that means, a huge wind farm, being put up at GoCodeGreen, for example, or, increasing use of solar cells so that they can control their own electricity spend and therefore control their own emissions and their sources of those emissions. That's probably the way of dealing with it. There is, of course, always new innovations, but at the moment we're still on the start of that hype cycle. We're still very much on the up, and people aren't yet considering the sustainable impact.
Good, thank you. So how do you balance the need for innovation and digital transformation with those sustainability goals? Is it going to become an inhibitor?
Sorry, my headphones cut out there. Sorry, David.
Sorry. So how do you balance the need for innovation and digital transformation with sustainability goals? Or do we see this as potentially becoming a bit of an inhibitor?
Opposite, I would honestly answer that. I think when I go back to the point I made at the start, or near the start, about adding sustainability as one of the measures in delivering new products. There's an irony probably in the fact that a well-designed product using best practice, well engineered, with great DevOps maturity, with componentized microservices, with design components that are reusable, tends to lead to low carbon outcomes. So I don't see it as an inhibitor. I see it as a way of pushing us towards best practice in lots of ways, ensuring, of course, that you are tracking your engineering and design choices all the way through, so you understand and can predict your impact.
Good. Thanks, Gareth. So we have, in fact, we are running really, really tight for time. I'm sorry, I think we are now at our time up. I know that there are some questions that have come through, which I think are really interesting, and perhaps what I do, if I'd pass them on to you, Gareth, and you can liaise directly with the individuals. So I'll do that for people who've put questions in the chat box. Then obviously just rest assured that I'll pass those on to Gareth. So just David, remains for me to.
I'm just going to say, if anyone wants the slides, I'm very happy to share them with you, David, for distribution, if anyone wants to take those.
Fantastic. Thank you. No, yeah, I'd be delighted to do that. Thank you. So just remains for me to say thank you, Gareth. Thank you very much for your time this morning. And thank you for all those that joined us. If anyone would like to follow up with Gareth about anything, then please either come through myself or get in contact, and we will make all the necessary introductions. Don't forget, everybody, that there'll be another Tech Tidbit at the same time on the 4th of March. Please keep an eye on socials, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks again, Gareth. Thank you for your time, and thanks, everybody. Pleasure having everybody with us today. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.